A sharp, stomach-churning crack ripped through the narrow alley, a sound so visceral that it momentarily silenced the usual bustle of the surrounding neighborhood. 17-year-old Kai, a slender teen with deep-set eyes and a proud tilt to his chin, let out a howl of agony as his arm bent at an unnatural angle at the elbow. He crumpled onto the rough asphalt, clutching that dangling limb to his chest, tears streaking his cheeks. Towering over him stood Kaido, a ruthless black-belted enforcer who wore a modified martial arts gi, like it was a soldier's uniform, the dark belt cinched tight around his waist, in a brazen display of dominance. He sneered at Kai's anguished form, his total lack of empathy chilling the atmosphere. "That's what you get," Kaido snarled, voice echoing off the crumbling brick walls, "when you have the nerve to say no." His words were loud enough for the small crowd of onlookers, vendors, shoppers, and passers-by, to hear, ensuring nobody missed the gravity of his threat. "Anyone else here feeling brave today?" he barked, sweeping a condemning gaze across the frozen faces. Kai, wiry but stubborn, had refused to pay Kaido's so-called protection money. In truth, it was little more than extortion that plagued the entire block, forcing honest folks to hand over hard-earned cash in exchange for the hope that Kaido and his gang would leave them unscathed. Kai had inherited his parents' humble corner store after a tragic accident had taken them both 2 years ago. Ever since, he'd been on his own, scraping together a living by selling instant noodles, canned goods, and cheap toiletries. Despite numerous warnings and hushed pleas from his neighbors to just give in, Kai's pride ran deeper than many seasoned adults. He had said no, with unwavering conviction, just like his father once had. And now, paying that moral debt cost him a shattered arm. A hush fell over the narrow lane that snaked through rows of weathered apartment buildings and open-air stalls. People lingered on balconies or peered from half-open doors. Some held up shaky phones, capturing the unfolding brutality in digital memory, but their trembling hands gave away their own fears. Ordinarily, the crowd here was lively, an odd mix of the old and young, of rickety bikes and overloaded grocery carts, all weaving past one another in an unchoreographed dance of daily survival. Tonight, though, the only movement came from the few who dared inch backward, desperate to avoid being singled out by Kaido's cold stare. Standing across the street, leaning against a battered bus stop sign, was Dwayne Johnson. He wore a simple dark cap, pulled low to conceal much of his face, and a plain navy jacket zipped part way, enough to obscure the toned physique beneath. By all appearances, he could have passed for a weary laborer or perhaps a quiet out-of-towner, observing the city's rougher side for the first time. But the slight tension in his posture betrayed him. Shoulders drawn tight, jaw set, fists flexing at his sides. He had been watching for a while, eyes narrowing every time Kaido menaced a shop owner or yanked a handful of coins from trembling hands. The instant Kaido drove a cruel kick into Kai's ribs, Dwayne's instincts took over. He didn't sprint or shout. He moved with calculated purpose. One moment, he was part of the silent crowd. The next, he was stepping off the curb, crossing the sliver of pavement between him and the brutality. The hush deepened as people realized something was about to shift. Kaido locked eyes on him, confusion flickering across his face. Perhaps this was just another bystander making a foolhardy attempt to intervene. "Oh, you want some too, old man?" Kaido barked, though at a glance Dwayne hardly looked older than him. He was just bigger, calmer. Dwayne didn't answer. Instead, he halted beside Kai, his gaze never straying from the black-belted thug, and let his jacket slide from his shoulders. It dropped to the ground with an almost ceremonial thud, an unspoken challenge in the very act. The city block that surrounded them was a microcosm of life's tough edges and hidden moral codes. Rusted iron fire escapes zigzagged up old buildings. Chipped paint revealed layers of pastels long faded to gray, and hand-scrawled signs advertised everything from cheap laundry services to second-hand electronics. Late-day sunlight turned smog into a gold-tinged haze, and the faint hum of overhead power lines added a low, thrumming undertone to the tension. Street vendors had pushed their carts back, and a bicycle delivery man stood, uncertain, with one foot on the pedal and the other on the curb, not daring to budge for fear of drawing Kaido's attention. A few moments earlier, the crowd was content to be spectators, capturing the horrifying moment on their phones as if it were a viral video waiting to happen. Now, those phones wavered in midair. Dwayne's singular resolve cast a different kind of hush over the assembled onlookers. Everyone recognized Kato's brutality. He was no run-of-the-mill petty criminal, but a man who combined the precision of a trained martial artist with the raw aggression of a street brawler. Rumor had it that he once seriously injured 3 men in a single fight, walking away with only a split lip. He thrived on fear, and in this part of town, it worked flawlessly. Until now. Kai's refusal, born of desperation and principle, had set a precedent no one else dared consider. Kaito glared at Dwayne, lips curving into a taunting sneer. "You're interrupting something, friend," he said, letting the last word drip with condescension. From the side, Kai whimpered, clutching his broken arm, trying to scoot himself away from the confrontation. Dwayne spared the teenager a brief glance, a silent check to ensure he was still conscious, then returned his full focus to the thug. Calmly, he rolled his shoulders, flexing tense muscles as though preparing for a workout. For a moment, he seemed to measure Kato's stance, the wide, confident planting of his feet, the slight tilt of the torso that signaled readiness to strike at any provocation. With a practiced flick of his head, Kaito directed his words again at Dwayne. "You hear me, big guy? Or are you just deaf?" He lifted his chin. "This is my block. I can do whatever I want. And you, well, you're just a piece of sidewalk trash who's about to get stepped on." Slowly, Dwayne's lips pressed into a thin line. His stoic expression conveyed neither fear nor bravado. It was simply a cool calculation, as though he were a chess player, eyeing a dangerous but predictable opponent. He reached behind his neck to adjust his cap, then tossed it aside. Kaito laughed under his breath. "Look at this tough hero. Guess you believe in fairy tales, old man." With the quickness of a striking snake, Kaito shifted his weight onto his back leg and unleashed a front kick aimed at Dwayne's chest, evidently intending to knock him off balance or at least show him who held the advantage. But Dwayne moved with astonishing economy, a slight step to the side, arms raised just enough to deflect, turning Kaito's powerful kick into a glancing blow that sailed past. The near miss startled Kaito, who stumbled half a step before regaining his footing. The crowd gasped in collective surprise. Many expected Dwayne to be flattened then and there. Even those who occasionally saw Kaito in action had never witnessed a mere bystander avoid that signature move so cleanly. A hush deeper than before settled in. Eyes darted between the 2 men, Kaito bristling with raw aggression, Dwayne exuding an unsettling calm. Blood still trickled from Kai's arm, staining his shirt, but the teen's gaze never left Dwayne's form. Despite his pain, he recognized something new, something none of them had dared hope for. Kaito might actually face a challenger he couldn't easily crush. The scrawny teen crumpled on the ground was named Kai. To the older store owners, he was a good kid, unlucky in life, but pure of heart. His parents, immigrants from a nearby province, had built the small corner shop from nothing. They worked dawn to dusk, saving each penny, hoping to eventually expand. Fate had intervened with a fatal truck crash, leaving Kai orphaned at 15. For 2 years, he'd managed the store on his own, forging a stoicism that belied his age. He refused charity. The neighbors who tried to pay extra for groceries noticed how he slipped the surplus back into their bags when they weren't looking. This was the kind of pride Kaito loathed. People with unwavering spines were challenges to his authority, because once one person stood up, others might follow. Kaito had emerged in this neighborhood about a year ago, unleashing a reign of intimidation that targeted shops big and small. He rarely needed to lay a hand on anyone. His reputation did the heavy lifting. But when words failed, the martial arts background filled the gaps. Rumors said that he had originally trained at a respected dojo, only to be expelled for excessive violence. Whether that was true or not mattered little to those he terrorized. The fact remained that he fought like a man who knew precisely how to cause pain. Until tonight, Kaito had never met real resistance on this block. He had battered or threatened every person who dared cross his path, collecting his hush money like clockwork. Those who refused got broken windows, stolen merchandise, or worse. And so, fear made the block revolve around him. Yet here was Dwayne Johnson, stepping in without a flicker of doubt. The hush from earlier deepened, turning the immediate surroundings into something like an outdoor arena. Windows above had begun to fill with silhouettes, families peering out from behind curtains, faces tight with worry. Some older men, once youthful scrappers in their own right, folded their arms and watched intently, perhaps recalling their days of standing up to bullies long ago. Kaido, momentarily rattled by Dwayne's unexpected evasion, jerked his arm in a tight circle as if to loosen tension, then dropped back into a classic fighting stance. 1 foot forward, fists up, shoulders squared. The black belt around his waist flapped in a faint breeze, reminding all who watched that this was not some amateur thug throwing random punches. "You're quick," Kaido muttered, scanning Dwayne's every shift. "But I'll break you just like I broke the brat's arm." Kai, still reeling from the pain, gritted his teeth. He wanted to help, to warn Dwayne about Kaido's lethal technique, but he could barely sit up without waves of white-hot agony radiating through his battered limb. Meanwhile, Dwayne merely rolled his neck once, cracking the tension away, and let out a slow exhale. The casualness in his stance might have been mistaken for complacency, but there was a deliberate readiness in how he balanced his weight, left foot slightly angled, body relaxed, yet coiled, like a predator waiting to pounce. Off to the side, a few bolder onlookers pressed forward. The rest maintained a wide circle, leaving the middle of the street clear. So much tension crackled in the air that even the city noise, a passing siren, a distant train whistle, felt muffled. And then Kaido struck again, pivoting into a roundhouse kick aimed squarely at Dwayne's ribs. It was a textbook move, lightning fast, well-rehearsed, designed to be unstoppable if timed correctly. Dwayne blocked with both forearms, absorbing the impact with a slight grunt. The force shoved him a step back, but he didn't lose his footing. Kaido growled, following up with a jab to the face, but Dwayne slipped the punch by turning his head to the side, narrowly avoiding a broken nose. That's when the atmosphere shifted decisively. No longer was this a one-sided beatdown. This was shaping up to be a proper fight, and it was like the entire neighborhood woke up to realize they were witnessing something big, something personal. Even the older residents, who had resigned themselves to living in quiet fear, felt the stir of hope in their chests. More people emerged from behind locked doors, each feeling that intangible current of possibility coursing through the humid air. In the lull that followed the quick exchange of kicks and jabs, a small murmur started. "He blocked it," someone whispered in disbelief. "Yeah, he blocked Kaido's best shot," added another, a vendor wiping sweat from his brow with a shaky hand. Several faces turned to Kai, who was still crumpled near the curb, his face drawn with pain. They looked from him to Dwayne and then back to Kaido. This wasn't how things usually went. Typically, Kaido's victim would be on the ground, battered beyond recognition or scurrying away for dear life. This time, the thug was facing a man who stood resolute. Kaido clenched his jaw, frustration flickering across his sharp features. He feinted left, launching a low sweep aimed to trip Dwayne. It was a cunning move, one that caught many off guard, but Dwayne reacted with a swift hop, clearing the arc of Kaido's leg, then seized the moment to deliver a short, explosive punch toward Kaido's midsection. The blow landed with a dull thud, enough to make Kaido hiss in surprise, but not enough to end the fight. A smattering of gasps rippled through the audience. "He landed one," someone muttered in awe. Staggering back a single step, Kaido's eyes flickered with genuine anger. "You've got some nerve," he said between clenched teeth. He shot a quick glance toward Kai, as if reminding Dwayne of the teen's broken arm lying in the street. "What makes you think you can beat me, huh? Because you can't." With that, he lunged forward, faking high with a lifted knee, and instead sending a brutal elbow toward Dwayne's temple. Dwayne managed to move his head just enough that the elbow only grazed the edge of his brow, but the force still stung. A small trickle of blood formed a line across his forehead. For a moment, a hush came over Dwayne. He blinked, raised a hand to wipe the blood away, and looked at the crimson smudge on his fingers. His expression remained impassive, but the onlookers sensed a flicker of something new. A seriousness taking root behind those calm eyes. A shift from merely defending to ending this confrontation. "Looks like I drew first blood," Kaido gloated, stepping back into a stance, practically tasting victory. "Let's see how long you last now." Dwayne responded by rotating his neck, a subtle motion that popped the tension from his joints. When he stared at Kaido again, there was a difference, no trace of hesitation. He advanced, and Kaido hurled a cross punch, aiming for the center of Dwayne's torso. Dwayne parried with his left arm, turning Kaido's punch aside, then drove a sharp knee up toward Kaido's ribs. The move missed by a hair as Kaido twisted away, but it was enough to give him pause. A hush of realization passed through the crowd. Kai, trembling from shock and pain, watched the exchange with a mixture of awe and guilt. A sliver of self-blame lodged in his mind. Dwayne was risking himself because Kai had refused to pay. If the older man lost, Kaido's vengeance would likely double in cruelty. But if Dwayne somehow won, it might break the cycle of silence that let Kaido roam free. The dusty wind whipped through the alley, rattling torn flyers on the walls and sweeping debris in small, twisting eddies. Even the ambient traffic noise seemed distant, as though the entire city was holding its breath. Kaido stared at Dwayne, muscles tensed, chest heaving from the exertion of missed strikes and stifled fury. Despite his extensive training, Kaido hadn't expected to face someone who could stand toe-to-toe with him, especially not a man who looked like he might just be passing through. The crowd observed every shift in posture, every telltale twitch of muscle. Shopkeepers who had previously hidden behind closed shutters now peered out, uncertain if they dared trust in what was happening. An elderly woman, who had once had her stall turned over by Kaido just because she was a few coins short, watched with trembling hands. In that unspoken audience, older men and women exchanged glances that carried a shared question. Could this confrontation restore the sense of community once shredded by fear? The next volley of attacks exploded without warning. Kaido stepped in with a quick jab-cross combination, each blow whistling mere centimeters from Dwayne's guard. Dwayne pivoted on his back foot, circling, forcing Kaido to chase him. A rapid front kick from Kaido brushed Dwayne's side, but before Kaido could capitalize, Dwayne spun with surprising agility, delivering a body shot that landed squarely on Kaido's obliques. The thug hissed in pain, momentarily stunned by the power behind the strike. The crowd audibly gasped. A few muttered excitedly, "He's hurting him now," while others pressed forward, drawn by the unfolding spectacle. Wincing, Kaido dropped into a low stance and swept his leg in a wide arc, aiming to knock Dwayne off his feet. Yet Dwayne leaped back, then darted forward to jam a stiff elbow toward Kaido's jaw. The elbow connected with a dull smack, rocking Kaido's head to one side and sending spittle flying. For a heartbeat, it seemed like Kaido might drop on the spot, but his resilience proved formidable. He staggered, set his jaw, and remained upright, determined not to show weakness. Without missing a beat, Kaido snarled like a caged animal, launching a desperate flurry of blows. A savage knee struck Dwayne's abdomen, drawing out a grunt of pain. A glancing hook caught Dwayne's shoulder, momentarily spinning him sideways. Seizing his chance, Kaido pressed in, trying to lock Dwayne into a clinch and immobilize him. But Dwayne steadied his stance, planted his feet, and resisted, using both arms to push Kaido off. Around them, the crowd collectively held its breath, watching the momentum shift like a precarious seesaw. Kaido's frustration was evident in his widened eyes and bared teeth, while Dwayne's measured composure remained. Blood trickled down Dwayne's forehead from the earlier graze, but his gaze stayed focused, unwavering. If Kaido represented the fury of a raging fire, then Dwayne was solid granite, patient, unyielding, calmly absorbing the heat without crumbling. Nearby, Kai tried to gather himself to stand, but a wave of dizziness forced him to remain grounded. Each time he caught sight of Dwayne's stance, balanced, prepared, he felt a thread of hope coil around his fear. Even if his own arm was ruined, the possibility that someone was capable of toppling Kaido's hold on the neighborhood was enough to steady his heart. Memories flickered through Kai's mind in bursts. The cozy dinners with his parents after closing the shop, the sharp sting of losing them both, the sense of isolation he felt in the months that followed. Now, in this alley of cracked pavement and peeling posters, he witnessed the unraveling of a tyrant he had believed unbeatable. The swirling dust mixed with tension so thick one could practically taste it. Kaido had never been pushed this hard in front of a crowd. Even the curious children on the sidelines wore expressions of stunned fascination. Kaido, face flushed from both effort and humiliation, spat at the ground near Dwayne's feet. "You won't be so tough once I break your bones," he snapped, voice low and shaky. The bravado still lingered, but there was an undertone of uncertainty now. He lunged again, bridging the short distance between them, with a quick series of strikes aimed at Dwayne's ribs and kidneys, spots that could crumble a man's stance if hit just right. Dwayne anticipated the move, absorbing some blows with raised elbows and redirecting others by guiding Kaido's wrists aside. The few that landed drew pained grunts, but failed to break Dwayne's form. This time, Dwayne answered more aggressively. After parrying a jab, he stepped inward and delivered a swift palm strike under Kaido's chin. forcing the thug's head to snap back. Immediately following that, he hooked his foot behind Kaido's ankle and jerked it forward, toppling the thug onto his back with a thud that reverberated in the still evening air. The onlookers gasped. "Down he goes!" someone exclaimed, not quite believing their own eyes. Kaido scrambled up, refusing to let his fear show. In a burst of rage, he grabbed a stray length of broken pipe lying near the curb. Swinging it in a wide arc, he aimed for Dwayne's midsection. Dwayne shifted fluidly, letting the pipe swish past, then trapped it against his forearm and torso. With a hard yank, he tore it from Kaido's grasp and flung it aside. Immediately, Kaido threw a frenzied punch aimed at Dwayne's temple, but Dwayne caught the blow in midair. Before Kaido could pull back, Dwayne pivoted, twisting Kaido's arm into a joint lock. A guttural scream tore from Kaido's throat as he was forced to his knees. But Dwayne didn't press to snap the limb. Instead, he shoved Kaido forward, releasing him abruptly. The thug rolled clumsily on the asphalt, quickly flipping onto his feet again, albeit panting heavily, eyes blazing. It was a calculated move on Dwayne's part, showing Kaido, and everyone watching, that cruelty wasn't his end goal. He was delivering justice, not viciousness. Yet the effect was psychologically devastating for Kaido, who suddenly realized he was outmatched by a fighter who, at any moment, could have likely ended the confrontation with a shattered bone or lethal strike. The hushed voices around them began to chatter in excitement. "Who is he?" asked a middle-aged vendor with a floral apron, her baskets of produce long forgotten on the ground. A group of teens, usually too scared to linger outside once dusk fell, edged closer, their phones capturing every angle. A wiry older man, white stubble across his jaw, leaned on his cane, whispering, "I haven't seen skill like that since my army days." Kai, blinking sweat from his eyes, finally managed to prop himself upright against a trash bin, ignoring the throbbing in his busted arm. His voice croaked, "You can do it," though he wasn't sure if Dwayne heard him over the intensifying heartbeat of the crowd. Kaido circled Dwayne with a half-limp, face contorted in a grimace that attempted to mask both pain and fear. His black belt, once a symbol of untouchable prestige, hung awkwardly around his waist, partially loosened during the scuffle. Even the modified GI jacket, which he wore to showcase his martial prowess, now sported a tear in the shoulder seam. Every inch of him screamed with the humiliation of being denied what he felt was his due: absolute control. A decade ago, Kaido might have been just another promising martial artist, but arrogance and a streak of cruelty had led him down a darker path. Expelled from any respectable dojo, he traded discipline for intimidation, forging a reputation on the backs of those too frightened to resist. This alley, with its cramped shops and weary residents, had been the perfect hunting ground, until now. Dwayne stood at ease, chest rising and falling in a controlled rhythm, eyes never leaving Kaido's. Blood still trickled slowly from that shallow cut on his brow, but otherwise he showed minimal signs of distress. His jacket lay crumpled off to the side, the only hint of the normalcy he'd worn before stepping into a life-altering confrontation. One might have mistaken him for a statue, but for the subtle shift of his stance, constantly adjusting to Kaido's potential angles of attack. Kai's broken whimper was muffled by the tense hush settling again around the two fighters. The hush was not just fear, it was anticipation, reverence even, as if each person sensed that the moment was bigger than a mere street fight. There was a symbolic weight. If Dwayne prevailed, then perhaps Kaido's stranglehold on their community would crack, letting in fresh air after a year of suffocating under the thug's shadow. In a desperate gambit, Kaido lunged forward, feinting a punch to Dwayne's left, but twisting midair to drive a vicious knee toward Dwayne's ribs. The speed and audacity of the move caught even Dwayne off guard, and the knee connected with a glancing blow that sent a jolt of pain through his side. Kaido roared in triumph, aiming a follow-up elbow at Dwayne's temple, but the momentary advantage evaporated as Dwayne brought his arm up in a swift, angled block. A grunt escaped him, acknowledging the impact, but he remained firm, unbroken. Without missing a beat, Dwayne countered with a powerful side kick to Kaido's midsection. The force of it propelled Kaido backward, forcing him to double over with a ragged gasp. A chorus of astonished exclamations rippled through the spectators. A shopkeeper actually clapped a hand over his mouth, eyes darting between the battered thug and the man who dared stand in his way. Kaido spat onto the ground, droplets of blood staining the dust. His breathing came in ragged spurts, chest heaving. "You don't know what you're doing," he muttered, voice raw. "I run this place. You can't—" But he trailed off, chest so tight he could barely force out another syllable. Dwayne's gaze flicked to the side, where Kai sat trembling, then shifted back to Kaito. "This ends now," he said quietly, the first words he'd spoken since the fight began. There was no Hollywood flourish, no shouted challenge, just calm, final certainty. A surge of tension electrified the crowd, each person feeling the shift of power resonating in the night air. Kaito's response to that calm declaration was a frantic barrage of strikes, punches, kicks, wild swings fueled by desperate aggression rather than measured technique. He aimed for Dwayne's head, torso, legs, any vulnerable target in reach. Some connected, glancing off Dwayne's arms or shoulders, eliciting winces. But the pure, unbridled anger behind them made Kaito clumsy. He had expended so much energy trying to overwhelm Dwayne that his stamina was now flagging. In contrast, Dwayne absorbed the hits while staying composed, waiting for openings to appear. Before long, those openings came. Kaito threw a wide, looping hook intended to smash Dwayne's jaw, but Dwayne slipped under it, stepping in with a brutal uppercut that snapped Kaito's head back. The thug stumbled, nearly tripping over his own feet as he reeled from the blow. Seizing the moment, Dwayne followed with a lightning-fast elbow that connected with Kaito's chest, driving the air from his lungs in a painful wheeze. Kaito staggered to one side, crashing into a stack of discarded crates. A few of the top crates teetered and fell, scattering broken fruit across the street. A wave of excitement and relief coursed through the spectators. For months, these people had lived under Kaito's intimidation, paying him out of fear, silently enduring daily humiliations. To see him battered and gasping was like watching a fortress crumble. Although no one cheered openly, fear was too deeply entrenched, hope lit their eyes, an undeniable spark in the gloom. Kaito, refusing to concede, pushed off the crates and lurched forward again, eyes wild. He grabbed a jagged piece of wood from the wreckage and brandished it like a makeshift knife. "Stay back!" he snarled, lashing out. The improvised weapon slashed through the air, aiming for Dwayne's midsection. Dwayne pivoted, letting the wood scuff his jacket sleeve. With a single deliberate strike, he chopped down on Kaito's wrist, sending the plank flying from the thug's hand. Fury spiking, Kaito tried a final, desperate tackle, charging at Dwayne like a bull, but Dwayne braced himself, lowering his center of gravity. They collided, feet skidding on the asphalt, arms locked in a chaotic clinch. For a tense second, it seemed that raw strength might overpower Dwayne. Kaito had the thicker frame of a brawler who knew how to leverage weight in close quarters, but the second was all Dwayne needed to shift his stance, slip an arm under Kaito's, and break the hold. A swift knee to Kaito's gut followed, forcing out a strangled gasp. Then, with the efficiency of a seasoned professional, Dwayne hooked his arm around Kaito's shoulder, pivoted his hip, and threw him over in a textbook takedown. Kaito hit the ground so hard that the thud resonated through the watcher's bones. Dust kicked up, forming a swirling cloud that momentarily obscured the two men. When it cleared, Dwayne was on his feet, while Kaito sprawled face down, groaning, arms twitching as he tried to push himself up. The hush that settled was different now, less shock, more clarity. People stepped closer, forming a wide ring. Kai, still cradling his broken arm, drew in a sharp breath, eyes shining with gratitude and disbelief. In the midst of it all, Dwayne knelt beside Kaito, whose face was bruised and streaked with dirt. For a second, it appeared Dwayne might deliver another blow. But instead, he placed a hand on Kaito's shoulder, pressing him firmly but not cruelly to the pavement, a silent command to stay down. In the heavy silence, Kaito lay dazed, chest heaving as his lungs fought for oxygen. His once pristine GI was shredded, the black belt askew, and the confidence he had worn like armor was utterly shattered. Dwayne rose smoothly, stepping back a pace as if giving Kaito one last chance to cling to a shred of dignity. The circle of people around them watched with held breath, phones still recording, hearts pounding. The shock of seeing Kaito subdued was nearly as staggering as the violence itself. For so long, the man had terrorized them with no consequences. Now, consequences stared him straight in the face in the form of a tall, silent man who didn't need threats or swagger. Kai managed to force himself upright, propping his back against a lamppost, tears of pain mingling with relief. He wanted to call out, to thank Dwayne, or warn him that Cato was still dangerous, but he found himself nearly speechless, chest tight with emotion. Others, however, began to murmur. An elderly shopkeeper, her hands trembling, muttered, "So that's what real strength looks like." A young mother carrying a toddler in her arms nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. A group of teenage boys, who had once idolized fighters and wrestlers on TV, watched Dwayne with a newfound respect that went far beyond fandom. Slowly, Dwayne shifted his gaze from Kaito, who lay groaning on the pavement, to Kai. Without words, he walked over, eyes full of concern. Carefully, he knelt and examined Kai's injured arm, his lips pressed in a thin line. The sight of the grotesque angle and the swelling made him wince. Kai bit back a scream, gulping down ragged breaths. "We need to get you to a clinic," Dwayne said in a gentle tone, at odds with the fierce battle just moments before. Is it broken bad?" Kai asked through clenched teeth, though he probably already knew the answer. Dwayne nodded soberly. "We'll find you a doctor," he replied, carefully helping Kai to his feet. The teen whimpered but tried to stand tall, leaning into Dwayne's support. The bystanders around them parted like a wave, offering space. One man, who owned a small rickshaw business, stepped forward, keys jangling nervously in his hand. I'll drive him," he offered, eyes flicking to Dwayne in anxious admiration. "Let's get the boy patched up." Kaito, still on the ground, turned his head to glare at them. Blood trickled from his split lip, and his voice came out in a rasping hiss. "Don't think you've won. I'll be—" But he couldn't finish the threat. A surge of pain forced him to cough, doubling over. No one moved to help him. Instead, several faces hardened. The intangible hold that Kaito had on their community had snapped. A local woman who ran a produce stand spat on the ground near him, a symbolic rejection of his tyranny. Even the old man with a cane in the back of the crowd was seen whispering something about calling the authorities. With minimal fuss, Dwayne guided Kai toward the waiting rickshaw. The teen, though trembling from the pain, clung to Dwayne's arm. "I didn't ask you to do this," he whispered, eyes tearing up more from gratitude than agony. "Thank you." Dwayne responded with a single nod. "Somebody had to," he replied simply, as though that explained everything. The rickshaw's small engine sputtered to life, and Dwayne gently assisted Kai into the passenger seat. Onlookers stepped aside with newfound deference, offering what seemed like a silent bow of respect, or at least a parting glance that conveyed admiration. The tension, once stifling, had transmuted into a cautious sense of liberation. Several of the braver souls moved to close in on Kaito, who was struggling to rise, sputtering obscenities amid pained gasps. But no one seemed inclined to kick him while he was down or exact petty vengeance. It was enough to watch him writhing, powerless, a living testament to the downfall of tyranny. Dwayne gave the rickshaw driver a quick pat on the shoulder, instructing him in a low tone, "Get him to the clinic fast. He's lost a lot of blood, and the arm's broken." The driver nodded vigorously, eyes darting back and forth between Dwayne and Kai. "Yes, of course," he managed, still sounding a bit starstruck. "I'll take the quickest route." The driver then pulled away, the vehicle wobbling slightly as it navigated potholes, eventually blending into the subdued cityscape beyond the flickering streetlights. A gentle hush settled over the block, a hush born not of dread, but of collective awe. Dwayne stood in the alley, rolling his bruised shoulder, scanning the faces around him. Many glances darted toward him shyly, as though people couldn't quite believe what they had witnessed. Some clutched phones still streaming video, capturing every second. He bent down to pick up his discarded cap and jacket, shaking off a bit of dust before slipping them on. A small circle began to form around him. Men, women, a few older teens, unsure how to approach or what to say. The fear that once chained them had evaporated in the heat of the fight, replaced by gratitude and curiosity. One woman in a worn apron mustered her courage. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" she asked, voice trembling with a mix of wonder and concern. Dwayne glanced at her, but said nothing. This silent refusal to elaborate added another layer of mystique to his presence. An elderly shopkeeper, hands gnarled from years of labor, stepped forward. He didn't speak, just bowed his head in a gesture of profound respect. Others followed suit, each performing some small act, be it a nod, a half-whispered thank you, or a pat on Dwayne's arm when he passed. A teenage boy, phone still in hand, blurted, "I got it all on video, mister," Everything. You're gonna be famous." He said it with excitement, as if Dwayne might relish the spotlight. But Dwayne only shook his head with a faint smile. There was no joyous celebration, no triumphant cheering. People mostly stood in reflective silence, as though processing the enormity of Kaido's defeat. A few even seemed uneasy, glancing at the still unconscious thug on the ground, aware that once he recovered, he might seek vengeance. Yet the presence of Dwayne, standing there with a quiet composure, suggested that the spell of terror was irrevocably broken. Eventually, Dwayne turned away from the crowd, moving through them like water through a narrow channel, with the same calm purpose he'd shown from the start. He left behind hushed voices and parted gazes. Some wanted to ask more questions or offer him a place to rest, a meal, or a drink of water, but something in his demeanor advised them that he preferred not to linger. And so, with a battered face and a bruise forming on his ribs, Dwayne Johnson walked off into the dimly lit street. The rumor mill would swirl in his wake. Stories would be told about the man who arrived without warning, toppled a tyrant, and vanished just as quickly. In time, the legend would grow. But to Dwayne, it was enough to know that he had done what needed to be done for a kid who dared to say no in a place where yes was forced upon everyone else.